This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library in our Oral History Project. Today is Tuesday, August 18th of 2015, and I'm at the library with Mr. Harley Bennet. Harley did not start out in Marshall, and he's going to tell us about his early history and what brought him to Marshall, and he's been a long-term resident here for quite some years. So Harley, you're on.
Okay. Well, I was born in East Chicago, Indiana, August the 16th, 1938, which makes me old.
It's just about a birthday away.
Yeah, a couple of days away. My parents were Joseph Bennet. Actually, it was Joseph Beninsky, and Margaret Eileen Elizabeth Cleric Beninsky, and then we had the name changed to Bennet during the Second World War. I was born a Beninsky, Hungarian.
Really? Okay.
I have one sister, and she's the reason why we moved to Marshall. She was a sickly child. When she was born, they used to put her in an oatmeal box and take pictures of her because she was premature born. But when she was maybe 2 or 3 years old, she had bronchitis all the time. And we lived in Lake County, which is a wet, damp, swampy area.
Oh, smog up there too.
Yeah. And the doctors said we needed to move south to get out of that climate. And next door to us during the Second World War, Madge and Jim Davis lived. Yeah. And Madge was a Nightlinger. Harv and Ethel Nightlinger. Well, at that time, all my grandparents were dead. And Ethel and Harv became my grandparents. They would come to Jim and Madge's next door to us in Hessville, Indiana, and visit, and I'd go over and spend time with Grandma and Grandpa Nightlinger. Well, the doctors said we could move just 200 miles south and that'd get us out of that weather. And Madge and Jim said, well, just move down to Marshall. So we moved down to this area one summer. I think it was the summer of '45. And we stayed with Jim and Madge on the County Line Road across where the Hugh Fife lived. And we stayed there for probably a full year, lived with Jim and Madge. And then the farm that we live on now, 40 acres, came up for sale, and there was a house on it. House and a barn. And my folks bought that 40 acres, and then some years later, 160 came up for sale across the road from us, and they bought that. I think they paid $35 an acre for that land. That was in the late 40s. And now the land supposedly is worth $5,000 or $6,000 an acre. But anyway.
Do you own that now?
Yes. Yes, we still own it. Matter of fact, my wife and I built a house on the 160. But anyway, when we lived on the County Line Road, I lived on the south side of the County Line Road, which was Clark County. And Charlotte and Hugh Fife Jr. lived on the north side of the road, and they went to Oliver School because that was Edgar County. Well, a week or so before school was supposed to start, and I was supposed to go to 5 Point School, which is close to Asbury Church. Dorothy Wilson, who was a school teacher at Oliver, stopped by and said, "You're going to Oliver School, and I'm going to pick you up every day and take you." Well, anyone who knew Dorothy would not buck what she said. That was it. So I went to Oliver School. And
Was
then
that a one-room school?
two-room school.
Okay.
It was a two-room school. Then when we moved to the farm where we live now, which is just about a little more than 3 miles outside of north of Marshall, there was a school across the field from our house, which was called Sassafras School. It's a one-room school. And I went to Sassafras School then until the 5th grade, when they closed the country schools and we moved into, or were bused into Marshall. And we were the country kids, and the townies didn't like us horning in on their.
Do you recall about what year that consolidation took place? Around 1950?
No, it was before 50. Let's see. I'm trying to think.
Somewhere in 48 is when it started in Martinsville.
It was probably 49, more like 49. Yeah. Yeah. And except for the time I went into the Navy in 1956, and then when I got out of the Navy and went to college at Bradley University in Peoria, from 56 to 1970, I've lived in Marshall all my life. So that span of time, the time I was in the Navy and the time that I went to Bradley, and shortly after that, I've lived in Marshall. And Marshall's, we've always had that. We've had that farm since 46, maybe 40.
So you were in the Navy before you went to Bradley then?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was one of those deals where when I went through high school, graduated from Marshall High School, I probably graduated like 3rd or 4th from the bottom of the class. Never took an ACT or an SAT. I wasn't going to go to college. Got into the Navy, and boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Training Center was 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night was school of some sort or another. Firefighting school, damage control school, sonar school, gas mask school, rifle school. And I got out of that, graduated from the boot camp, went to San Diego to school, went to storekeeper school, which is bookkeeping, for I think it was probably 6 or 8 weeks. Got out of there and I thought, man, I'm done with this school stuff. Got aboard ship. First thing they gave me was tests on finding out where every nut and bolt and screw and on the ship was, fore and aft, up the top side and down to the bottom. And then after that, it was firefighting school, rope tying school, gunnery school. And it didn't take very long for me to realize I was going to be going to school the rest of my life.
Well, Harley, had you thought about making the Navy your career?
Yes, yes. Matter of fact, I had, when I was just about to graduate from Bradley, I had contacted the Navy and told them that I was interested in making it a career.
Okay.
But not as a reserve officer. I wanted to go in as a regular Navy officer because I knew what happened to reserve officers. They were in and out, activated, deactivated, And as long as you maintained your commission, you could always be activated on a moment's notice. So I wanted to be regular Navy. I even wrote Senator Dirksen and told him that, you know, I wanted to make the Navy a career. I had all the paperwork. All I had to do was sign it. And they said that I could go in and reserve status, and within a year I could convert to regular Navy. And I said, I've heard that song and dance before. I won't do it. So I never signed my final papers. Matter of fact, I don't have them anymore. But I graduated from Bradley in accounting, and it was an interesting set of majors because everything was geared towards accounting and business, including history classes, literature classes. You know, they said, if you want to be an accountant, you know, you're going to learn everything there is to know about business. And you know, like in history, I remember we studied history of 1890, the expansionism of 1890. That was it. We didn't, not 91, not 89, but 1890. The whole year we spent on that year. And it was just about the business development of that year and how significant it was to the development of the United States. I took business machine, and that was adding machine. Business machines. This was days before computers. It was really the days before high-speed adding machines. You know, comptometers were the manual comptometers were the word of the day.
And everything was mechanical at that time too. I mean,
Yeah.
the calculators, the
Right.
posting machines, everything,
Right, everything.
was mechanical.
Yeah, it didn't have copiers. There was, you know, we used, it was that gel-based Ditto, which was terrible. And when I graduated, I got a job working for Landing and Rothbaum, which was a CPA firm in Peoria. And I worked for them for a couple of years. Ann and I were married. She was making more money than I was. She was teaching. She had a degree from the U of I. Our oldest daughter was 7 years old then. She was Ann's daughter, but we both had to adopt her when we got married. And
Were you married in Peoria?
no, we were married in her hometown, Centralia.
Oh,
Yeah, and my sister, who was working as a florist in Peoria at the time, she put all the flowers together and shipped them down. And a friend of mine from college drove down and was my best man. Another friend of mine who had dated Ann for a number of years and actually introduced Ann and I. He gave us a wedding present, and that was he and his girlfriend, who attended the wedding, brought Laura back to us because we knew both of us were going to have to go to work Monday morning. So we got married on a Saturday, drove back to McLean where we were living, and Ann was teaching, Leroy, Illinois. And Richard and I can't remember what her name was now, Joan Dark, I think it was. They brought Laura to us Sunday afternoon. Yeah, it was a fun time. And matter of fact, Richard, who is Richard Pfeiffer, Ann and I are meeting him and his current wife next Monday in Bloomington, Illinois for lunch.
his current wife.
Yeah, His first wife died. Yeah. And he has I think three children, and his oldest is adopted also. But we have been lifelong friends. We were friends in college, and all through these years we've been. And he was in the Coast Guard. He tried to get in the Navy, but his eyesight was so poor he couldn't get in the Navy. Yeah. Even when he tried to fake it, the doctor caught him. Said, "Nah, you can't. You're colorblind, aren't you?" And no. What makes you say that? Yeah.
Harley, going back to those days in college and majoring in business, there was a thing that I remember called a practice set.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you had a few of those too.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I had practice set in high school. Cost accounting practice set. I remember that. And that subject, cost accounting, was one that I just did not like. Didn't like at all. And when I got into cost accounting at Bradley, it was came up with an hourly exam, or no, it was a midterm exam. And the professor said, "I'm going to try something new. It's a
dangerous.
It was a standardized test where you had to read the question, read the answers, and check what answer was correct." And I went through and the professor said that I got every answer correct. He said, "Unfortunately, you put them in the wrong column." He said, I quit grading when it got to an F. Well, I ended up.
I shouldn't laugh, but
having
been there.
Yeah. I ended up with the highest score in the history of Bradley University in cost accounting. Anyway, I spent 35 years as a cost analyst. And that was my...
Did you have an adding machine in your room or anything?
No. Nope, did not. I sat for the CPA exam once, and you were allowed a pencil sharpener, and that was it. Even when you had to do logarithms, you had to do it in pencil. Yeah. How you're supposed to do logarithms by pencil, I don't know, but.
Did you have any touching of class at all on a thing called a computer?
No, there was no computers. We had our business machines class was crank adding machine, ditto machine, mimeograph machine, typewriters, comptometers. That was it. That was the business machines. They did, by the time I got to the CPA office, we did have a mechanized, we had Marchands, which were
calculators.
Way up there.
Mechanical.
Yeah, but you had to crank you push the button.
Move it over.
Yeah, you're right. It was electrified. You punch the numbers in, and you'd push the enter button, and it would do its little thing. But then you had to turn the carriage to get the carriage to move over. Yeah, because it wouldn't move over by itself. But by the time, that was in 1963. In 1966, I went to work for Armour and Company, and they had a 1401. Yeah.
Oh, they were right downtown.
Yeah, they were. Reel to reel. It was in the basement of the building, set on 3 feet of concrete so that the vibration didn't mess up the machine. However, I just remembered when I was leaving the Navy in 1959, because I got early discharge to go to college. In 1959, the Oakland Naval Supply Center was going to computer, and we were using punch cards. And the deal was I would get, the day that we finished transferring all the records from our ship over to the Naval Supply Center would be the day that my skipper would give me a release. So we were in Oakland, California, and we worked like demons to get those punch cards. We had trays and trays of punch cards, and little spikes that you stick through to pull them, get them lined up. It was terrible.
Did you run the sorter also to get them?
No, I didn't run the sorter. No, the only qualified people could run the sorter, and I wasn't qualified because I didn't have the class for that. Yeah, but the day everything was completed, I went to my commanding officer, who was a full bird captain. And I told him we were done, and he said, okay, he said, I'll sign your release papers. He said, do you want to be released into the active reserves or the inactive reserves? And I said, what's the difference? And he said, well, the active reserves is where you go to meetings once a month, and then once a year for 2 weeks you go on a cruise someplace.
Summer camp.
And I said, I don't think I'm going to have time for that. And he said, I'll just release you to inactive.
Good choice.
Reserve. And I said, fine. So I got my papers, filed them in Cook County where I was released to, and went to college in Peoria, and a month or two later I get this nasty letter from the commandant of Glenview Naval Air Station saying I had to report for duty because they're going to hang me for not. And I got on the telephone and called him.
Oh gosh!
And I said I was released into the inactive reserves. And he said, that's not possible. And I said, why not? And he said, because the person who released you should have released you into active reserves. And I said, well, the last order that I received from a full bird captain was to report for inactive reserve duty. I said, if you want to countermand that last order, you have to do it in writing. That's the last I heard of it.
I mean,
Yeah.
that'd kind of shake your confidence, though, I think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because my last order from a commissioned officer was be released to inactive reserves.
And I assume you had a copy of all that
Oh yeah,
paperwork.
I still have it too.
Keep it.
Yeah, I still have it. Yeah.
Harley, going back through education of high school and college, did you have a favorite subject or something that maybe kind of said, this is what I want to do and go into accounting?
No. No, I just wanted to get done with school. Matter of fact, I didn't even go to my own baccalaureate. I was doing something else that day. And didn't go to that. I did go to my graduation because I was forced into it by my parents and Charlie Bush.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't have a favorite anything. I thought I was going to be a farmer the rest of my life. Didn't turn out that way.
So you got out of Butler and went through some accounting.
Bradley.
Went through some accounting jobs.
Yeah.
Were those in the city then? I think you mentioned Chicago area, and Glenview.
I worked in Peoria. I worked for Landing Rothbaum. That was a CPA firm in Peoria. Then I worked for Dean Barron's Asphalt Company in Bloomington, Illinois.
Oh.
And then I worked for Armour and Company. I was with Armour for a number of years, and ended up as an internal auditor for them. And actually, I was the youngest internal auditor for Armour and Company. And I traveled all over the United States for Armour auditing, doing the internal auditing.
Is that out of Bloomington also?
No, it's out of Peoria.
Peoria.
Yeah. Well, then the rules were you could, with Armour, was that you could live anywhere that they had a facility. Well, one day when I was someplace in Ohio, my wife called me and said, some people came to move us today. Now this is where we're still in Peoria, and they had closed the plant in Peoria, the Armour plant in Peoria. And I said, oh really? I said, what happened? And she said, I sent them away with a 30-06. And she said, we aren't moving. And so I got on the phone, called my boss in Chicago, and said, what's going on here? Here's what my wife told me. And he said, we just assumed you'd move to Chicago because we've closed the plant in Peoria. And he said, you have to live where the... I said, I can live anywhere because I can, all I have to do is be close to an airport. To get to an airport, to travel to where I need to go. He said, it has to be where there's an Armour location. Well, about that time, I got a job at Keystone Steel and Wire in in Bartonville, Illinois. And that was not that was a trying time because it was Keystone Steel and Wire at the time was a family-owned company, and they had, well, I'll give you an example. We had a new vice president. We had a lot of vice presidents, and we got a new vice president one day, and we were getting ready to have our morning strategy meeting, and the budget director and I were setting up, getting ready to start the meeting, and he came in, and the budget director said to him, are you going to do something, or are you going to be one of these no-do-nothing vice presidents? And he said, my brother told me, who was the president of the company, my brother told me if I set foot outside of this office on the plant side, he'd have me fired. So, not too long after that, a friend of mine who worked for an employment agency in Peoria called me, and he said, I'm not supposed to be doing this, but he said, didn't you used to live close to Terre Haute, Indiana? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, there's a cost accounting job opening up at a place that you might be interested in. And he said, it's Weston Paper, and he said, and my ears pricked up, and he said, you might be interested in that. So I made a phone call, came down, interviewed, took their tests, which I'd been doing all my life, taking tests. And
made you well prepared then.
Yeah. And oh yeah, particularly seeing that the test that was taking, we had studied at Bradley, You know, that was part of our management class, was HR class was these tests. So I knew what the answers were supposed to be, or what they were looking for. So I took the exams, passed their tests. I worked there for 35 years. Yeah, it's a good time. Good place to work.
So when you took the job with Weston, was that what prompted the move then back to Marshall, I guess?
Yes.
As far as your residence.
Right, yeah. So we moved back to Marshall in I think it was 1969. Yeah, 69. And we surveyed off 7 acres off the farm, and that was a near fiasco. Because when we moved back to, I'll have to back up a minute. When we moved back to Marshall, there was not one house for sale or for rent in the city of Marshall. That was in 1969.
Oh.
So I went to Burton Klein, who used to be my 4-H teacher, or 4-H leader. He was the insurance salesman. And I told him what our situation was, and he said, you know, there's a house that's condemned over on 2nd Street. He says it's condemned because they're going to tear it down to build the Cork Medical Center. And he said, but that's not going to take place for about a year. Well, you need it more than a year. And I said, I hope not. He said, let me talk to some people. So he and Charlie Bush got their heads together, got the house uncondemned so that we could move into it. And there's a reason why it was condemned. When we went into the house, it had 14-foot ceilings and 12-foot windows. And the floor slanted from south to north. Because Ann and I went in, the floor was terrible, and we painted the floor, and she said, you know, all the paint's going to roll to that side of the room. But the kids loved the house because they would ride their tricycles through the foyer, through the dining room, through the kitchen, through the living room, back through the foyer. That's how big it was. It was a big house. Impossible to heat. It was terrible. But we went to the bank, First National Bank, because that was a long story too. Because back when I was 15 years old, probably 14 or 15, I wanted to buy a brewed gilt, and I went to Delaney Bank, which was my folks' bank, and they said, well, they'd be happy to loan me the money because I needed $100 to buy a registered brewed gilt for a 4-H project. And they said I'd have to have my folks put up collateral for the loan. And I said, no, they're not going to do that. They said, well, they wouldn't loan me the money. So I was leaving the bank, and Percy Stanfield saw me. He said, how come you look so sad? And I told him my story, and he said, you come over to the First National Bank, which was right down the street. Mm-hmm. We went in. He opened up his desk drawer and peeled off $100. Or he asked me first, he said, we want a check or cash? And I said, if I had cash, I'd go buy that hog right now. And he said, he'd peel off these $20 bills. And I said, do you want me to have my folks come in and sign papers? And he said, no. He said, if I can't trust you today, I'll never be able to trust you.
So Stanfield did that himself?
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, as far as I was concerned, it was the bank.
Yeah.
Because he was the bank.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've been a customer with First National Bank ever since. But when we went to the bank to build our house, I went in. Percy was long dead by then. I can't remember what the man's name was. It wasn't Evans, but it was a wrinkled up old man.
W.E. Morris.
Morris, that's right, Mr. Morris. And I told him my story about Percy. And I said, you know, we're building this house out here. They said, all I have is the land. And I said, I know you're not going to want to mortgage that land because it's not enough. I said, what I want to do is I want to borrow enough money to get started in 28 or 29 days. I'll write you a check for the interest, and I'll tell you how much money I need to go on, to continue on, and you add it to my loan. Loan me that much total money, and I'll pay off the loan on the 30th day. And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, I'll do that. Yeah, shocking. Well, that's what everybody in town told me. How'd you do that? Well, when the house was completed, they wrote the mortgage. And that's, that was fine with me. Well, every 29th day, I paid the mortgage. Every 30th day, I paid off the loan on time. It is a month-to-month loan. I learned that at Bradley. That's how you do things. That's how you, process with things like that. Anyway.
So what year did you actually build the house then?
1970.
70?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We built it for $13,800. And it's it was a little less than 1,900 square feet at the time. All oak, oak floors, oak trim, oak doors, redwood siding. That was everything. 13.8.
You can't buy a new car for that now.
No. Well, in about 10 years ago, we added another 400 square feet on because all our children were bringing their children home for holidays, and we didn't have a real dining room. Now we do. But we spent $35,000 adding 450 square feet to the house in 13 windows. Yeah. It's.
You mentioned your daughter, but you had a son come along there somewhere too.
We have two daughters. We have Laura, who's our oldest, and then we have Rachel, who's the middle child, and then Joseph is our baby. And our baby's 48 years old now. Laura will be 60. That's our oldest. She'll be 60 years old this coming January. Rachel's, I think, 51. Yeah, and holding.
And where do they live, Harley? I know they're not around here.
No, Joseph lives in Seattle. He's a doctor out there. Rachel's vice president of Kids Hope United in Charleston, Illinois. And Laura's she's a retired school teacher, and she's now working as a family counselor in Danville, Illinois. She lives in Westville. I always I have to think. Westfield is that way, Westville is that way. Yeah.
We've got a couple of them that are not a long drive away from Marshall then.
Right.
They're fairly close
Yeah.
down the road.
And Laura has 2 grandchildren, so that makes us 2 great-grandchildren. And we have a supposedly grandson coming, or great-grandson coming in November. So Laura will have 2 grandsons and a granddaughter. The granddaughter, who's Penelope, is 3 years old. She was hoping to be a big sister, but when she found out she's having a brother, she didn't know how she was going to become a brother, big brother.
All the excitement vanished.
She even had a name picked out for her new sister.
And you mentioned you had a sister, and what was her name?
Sandy. Well, it's actually Kathleen Sandra Joe. I'm trying to think. I don't think she was named Bennet. No, she wasn't. She was Bennett. Kathleen Sandra Joe Bennett Randall. Yeah, she lives up north of Paris on a farm.
With the interest on a farm and all, you said you were going to be a farmer.
Yeah.
Did you have some particular hobbies or something that kind of carried through, and maybe even today?
Mostly gardening. This has not been a good year for gardening, but yeah, I always gardened when I was a kid, and I've got a big garden spot. This year was just everything rotted in the ground this spring. It was too wet, too cold, and then when things did come up, it got too dry and too hot. And it's just.
I'm sure when you were a youngster living on a farm, you did have a pet of some kind, and you still have some pets today?
Yeah, matter of fact, we have 2 dogs at the vet right now. Yeah, they're pups. They're big pups right now. They're getting their last series of vaccinations and getting heartworm and flea medicine today. And then we have, Anne has a beagle. She loves beagles. And we have 1 cat right now who rules the roost.
Well, your wife taught English, I think, most of her career here.
She did.
Didn't she retire a few years ago also?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she's a retired teacher. Yeah. Just as they were starting to put in computers in the schools, she retired just in time to not have to go through that ordeal. She does not like computers, and I don't blame her.
What year did you retire then from Weston Paper?
I retired in 1999. I was 61 years old then, and I had put in my letter informing the management that I was going to retire at 62. And lo and behold, International Paper bought us out. And through some negotiations on the, negotiations, it wouldn't be the correct word. Through some negotiations, they gave me a choice. I could either retire at full pension plus a golden parachute, or move to Memphis, Tennessee for a year. So I retired.
It'd be a hard decision to make.
No, it wasn't. And matter of fact, we had both my wife and I had free medical until we were 65, went on Medicare. So why would we move to Memphis, Tennessee for a year? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, no.
No, it was just, yeah. And yeah, matter of fact, I think 90% of Ann's salary went into mutual funds that year because
Imagine that.
yeah, because I didn't have a mutual fund account at that time, but I had enough income that we could put almost all of her salary in the mutual funds, which were the 403B.
403B.
Yeah. Well, then, part of my going away present from Weston Paper was they hired a consultant to teach or help me learn how to become a consultant. And and I did some consulting around the Marshall area in Terre Haute. And one day a former Weston employee who was the chief financial officer for Boga in Paris called me, and he said, my cost accountant is going to go on maternity leave. He said, could you give me a couple weeks? And I said, well, sure, I could do that. So I went up and we talked, and we wrote up a contract and for 13 weeks. and I went to work for him. And at the end of that was the end of it. Well, then about a year or so later, he called me. He said, my cost accountant's going on vacation for 2 weeks. Can you come up and cover for her? I said, sure, I'll do that. And I went up and covered for her. About 6 months after that, he called me. He said, my cost accountant quit. Could you come up and cover for a period of time? I said, sure, I can do that. So this went on for a number of years. And one day he called me. He said, my current cost accountant has quit, or is going to quit in 2 weeks. She gave me 2 weeks notice. And he said, can you come up? He said, we need to talk. So I went up.
And you'll listen.
Yeah. And we came to an agreement, told him what my fee was going to be. And he said, oh, by the way, Friday is my last day. I said, you're kidding. He said, how do you like to be controller too? I said, we have to renegotiate this contract. So he said, well, whatever you want, you can have. So I shot him a price. And Friday he left and I took over. Well, the first order of business was we had $1.5 million IRS bill that was overdue. And he said, the problem is, he says, I don't think we owe it. He says, that's not ours. So it took me about 3 weeks to figure it out after he had left. And I hired a new controller, and the first thing I did was I gave her this letter, and I said, you need to sign this letter and save yourself $1.5 million right now, because it explains to the IRS what had happened, and the bill should have been against the division in Michigan, not here in Illinois. But anyway, got that taken care of. Mm-hmm. And the new controller said, how do you like to stay on for a while? I said, well, it's up to you. So I ended up staying there until that controller left, and I hired a second controller. And then I stayed on until the Germans came in and installed an SAP system and helped them do that. And straightened out all their insurance records. And then I hired a new cost accountant. And then they were getting ready to consolidate all their business to Paris, Illinois. And the union went on strike. They went on strike, and the Germans said, we'll close the plant. And they said, no, you won't. They said, yeah, we're going to close the plant. And they did. Plant's closed. But I worked there for, I worked there from 2000 till the plant closed about 3 years ago.
So you have actually retired twice then?
Twice, yeah. I'm retired. Yeah, I'm retired again. Yeah.
Harley, I know, and you're not even before you retired, you were quite involved in local things.
Yeah.
I know Scouts, church, and a place called Harlan Hall, and all those things. Do you care to elaborate a little bit about those?
I was involved with Boy Scouts for 25 years.
I think you had 5 years beyond. I was 20.
25, yeah. Yeah, because when you all quit Boy Scouts, I was still there. Yeah. Oh, I remember that was a long 25 years too. That was a lot of interesting time. And one of our current conservation officers was one of my survival camping trainees. Yeah. And he a couple times he has told me that he said that weekend that we went out for survival camping, he says that really helped me a lot. He said, yeah.
It helped him, but not you, huh?
Oh well, anymore couldn't do that because you can't. You know, I would take 2 boys, and that's it. I mean, it's very difficult to feed and house one person in the wild with just what you have in your pockets. You know, I'd pick them up on a Friday after I got off work. I tell them I'll pick you up on Friday. I told their parents I'll have them back for Sunday morning church, and they could bring any meal that they wanted to bring. One meal. That was it. And the rest the rest we would get from whatever we found. And I took some boys out in February sometime. And that's very difficult to, you know, especially when they won't eat cattail roots and they won't eat fish that you catch through the ice and things of that nature. It's you know, or crab apples under the snow. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of food out there. It's just you've got to be willing to eat it.
One thing I remember were a lot of Eagle Scouts came out.
Yes, we had a lot of Eagle Scouts. Well, we had an Eagle Scout program, really. You know, the boys, when they became tenderfeet, if they said they wanted to become an Eagle Scout, we had that path worked out for them. And there's a lot of boys who said, "Oh, I want to be an Eagle Scout." Yeah, well, it's not that easy. You know, it takes a lot of time, a lot of work. But we had a lot. I can't remember how many we did have, but we did have a lot. Yeah. And then there was Main Street. I think I got rooked into Main Street by Charlotte Moorcraft. You know, I always said that Charlotte was a five. She lived across the road. She lived on the north side of the County Line Road. I lived on the south side of the road. And from the time I was 7 years old, Charlotte tried to boss me around, and she's still trying to boss me around. But one day she said, "You need to get involved in Main Street." And the next thing I knew, I was being elected president of Main Street. And I don't know how that happened. That was my first year in Main Street. But Main Street did a lot of good work in the city of Marshall. I remember the biggest projects we had was the Chautauquas. And the other one was getting the mayor to purchase Harlan Hall rather than have it tore down. And then a whole group of us worked on Harlan Hall for a lot of years. Got it whipped into shape. It's a beautiful building now.
At least there's a sense of accomplishment there too.
Yes, there is. Yep.
Well, with the number of, I guess, modern things we have all around us, Is there some modern convenience that you'd say, I just couldn't live without that?
Central heat. Central heat. I think that's it. Because I grew up without central heat, without running water, without electricity. And I remember when Ann and I were, that first summer we were on 2nd Street in this condemned house. We were laying there in bed, perspiring, and I said, when we build this new house, it's going to have central air conditioning, and it did. But I still, central heat is, because when we built the house back in 1969 and 70, it was not unusual to lose electricity on our, for days. So one of the first things that we did was that we put a secondary heat source in our house. We have a wood burning stove it's a tri-level house. In the 3rd level down, we have a wood burning stove, and it can heat the whole house. And there have been times when my father was still alive when we'd lose electricity and we'd say, come on, Dad. And it's warm and toasty, and we had Aladdin lamps, and that's one thing I collect. I collect lamps.
Oh.
I do. Miniatures. I got a lot of miniature lamps, and I have several Aladdin lamps. And when the power goes off now, and I fire up my Aladdin lamps, the utility people usually stop by and say, do you have a generator? And I said, no, we have Aladdin lamps.
But then you have to clean those yucky chimneys.
That's okay. I don't mind.
Harley, you've covered a lot of things in all of history. When you first moved to Marshall, and say compare that today, I'm not talking about just buildings, but what do you say has been some big changes in Marshall?
Oh, the city itself?
Mm-hmm. Or people?
Well, one of the big things is that you don't see horses tied up to the parking meters on the streets anymore. And, we used to ride horses. I mean, face it, back in the 40s and 50s, people were still farming with horses in this part of the country. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, I had a neighbor who farmed with horses until probably the middle 70s. And I can remember, we had, yesterday, we had a school reunion in Paris. And the school reunion was Oliver School, Sullivan School, and 5 Point School. They're all one-room schoolhouses. Mm-hmm. And I made the comment, I said, I remember the first corn picker I saw. I was about 7 years old, and I knew it would never come to anything because it left more corn on the ground than it put in the wagon. Because us kids have to glean the field right out. You'd go 10 feet, you have a gunny sack full of corn, because that's what the corn picker missed.
Kept the crows well fed.
It was a single row corn picker pulled behind a tractor. And it was terrible. We could pick corn by hand with horses faster and more complete than a corn picker would. Well, today, these corn picker combines go out there and, they don't, if they lose 20 kernels out there in the field, I'd be surprised.
And they can cover a field in a few passes too,
yeah.
A small field.
Yeah, and it used to be, even in town, Percy Stanfield had a tractor dealership right here, right in downtown Marshall. A car dealership of downtown Marshall.
And they had John Deere.
Yeah.
And Flowers.
Yeah, Flowers, yeah.
And then Chrysler had something, I don't recall what he had.
Henry J's. there was Henry J. dealer down here where the
Clotfellers,
yeah.
Hudson.
That's
And then the
Henry J.
Chrysler Plymouth dealer, they held some kind of tractor franchise.
And Jones's had a Dennis Jones had a Ford tractor dealership over here where the
Right.
well, it used to be the power plant was there
Yeah.
years ago. You know, what, in the 20s.
Well, Harley, you've really covered some nice, interesting history, and that's exactly what we're looking for. As I said to people, this is not for today or tomorrow, but really it's for someone in the future to look at, and they can come back and look at this. If you were in, say, one of your trips to Europe or something, or maybe even to Florida, someone said, Marshall, Illinois, well, where's that and what's that all about? What would you tell them about Marshall and why it might be a good place to visit?
It's one of the cleanest, and this comes from my wife's father. He one weekend he was over here and he said, I'm going into town, just snoop around. And he came back and he says, I finally figured out what it is about Marshall. It's different. And I said, what's that? He says, it's clean. He says, not only is it clean, but he says, there aren't, even the vacant lots are mowed. And I said, yeah, it's always been that way. And you know, yesterday I had some ISU students here working on the Historical Society building and grounds, and they said it's so peaceful and quiet here. It's just heaven. Yeah, it is. That, you know, and that's all you can say about it. It's just a really nice place.
And you would not care to move back to Peoria or
No.
Bloomington or some of those places
No,
at all?
it's a beautiful place to live because I'm about 3.5 hours from St. Louis. I'm less than 2 hours from Indianapolis. I'm 4 hours from Chicago and 4 hours from Louisville. Where else would you want to live? I mean, face it. You can buy a house for $150,000, $60,000. Taxes are low. We're right in the heart of the Wabash Valley where pumpkins and watermelons and cantaloupes and peaches grow.
Well, Harley, you said it pretty well, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out and being a part of our oral history project. It's exactly the type of information that we put on our future history for future people to look at, and it's really been fun visiting with you. I've appreciated it so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.